Hey heroes, and welcome to another uncanny episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is brought to you in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelade. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week's tale begins during the Second World War with a Japanese soldier from Yokosuka named Kenji Oyama. A war hero of some renown, in 1945 he volunteered to become a kamikaze pilot and attempted to bring down an American aircraft carrier in a suicide attack. However, due to a 1-in-a-million fluke, the explosives in Oyama's plane failed to detonate, and while his face was badly scarred in the crash, he survived and became a prisoner of war until Japan's surrender later that year. After returning home, he sought to restore his nation's honor as well as his own, and vowed to hide his scarred face until he had done so. He wrote a highly successful book that detailed his wartime experiences and used the profits from it to buy a small island off the coast of Hokkaido. He also married and had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter named Yuriko, who was reportedly born in Osaka. At some point, Kenji Oyama also met a U.S. Army Ranger named William Stryker, whose wife Marcy tutored Yuriko and her brothers from a young age. In addition to this education, the 3 siblings also underwent intense martial arts training, owning their bodies and minds. Kenji Oyama also branded the faces of his children, supposedly as a sign of superiority. Now, I haven't found anything that confirms this, and I'm not exactly an expert on the Japanese language, but the closest thing I could find to the symbol that Kenji branded Yuriko with was this kanji. Normally read as shu, depending on context it can mean a collection, to collect something, or to gather or congregate. However, the reasoning for the use of this particular symbol was apparently known only to Kenji Oyama himself. In any event, one thing he did collect was followers, as his code of honor attracted those who shared his worldview and goals. Using his position to finance reactionary political activity, Oyama became known to his devotees as Lord Darkwind, in reference to his desire for a gale from the past to sweep away the country's shame. Also, Darkwind could be translated to Japanese as Yamikaze, which potentially makes this name a reference to his failed role as a kamikaze, which means divine wind. As part of his plans to restore his nation's honor, he embarked on a quest to create the ultimate warrior, and began studying the metal adamantium, a nearly unbreakable steel alloy discovered by the American metallurgist Dr. Myron MacLain. Using MacLain's work as a starting point, Darkwind was the first to develop a method of bonding adamantium to human bone. However, before he could put this method into practice, all of his research notes and data were stolen, setting him back several decades. While Oyama himself never learned who had stolen his work, I'm sure many of you can already guess exactly who ended up getting it and how it was used. As the years passed, Darkwind grew increasingly obsessive and instilled a fervent fanaticism in his devotees, who he formed into a private army of samurai. This included a man named Kira, who Oyama's daughter Yuriko had fallen in love with, causing her to fear for his safety. Furthermore, Yuriko's 2 brothers were allegedly killed while trying to assassinate the Japanese Prime Minister, although I will note that one of them, Kazuo Oyama, resurfaced years later as a masked assassin. In any event, Yuriko Oyama grew to resent her father and secretly waited for her chance to free both herself and Kira from his influence. Meanwhile, Lord Darkwind eventually succeeded in rediscovering the secrets of his adamantium bonding process. There was an incident in which a Japanese nationalist named Tomo Yoshida sent a team of mutants including Mystique, Rogue, Blind Spot, and Sunfire to steal research from Darkwind's facility in Yokohama, but this time Oyama escaped with the data, preventing any further setbacks. Soon he found a worthy test subject, the enigmatic American assassin Bullseye, whose spine was shattered during a battle with his vigilante nemesis Daredevil, when he fell from a height of several stories and landed on the pavement below. Darkwind brought Bullseye back to his island in Japan, where the assassin's skeletal structure was repaired and reinforced with adamantium implants. Oyama intended on having Bullseye assassinate the Japanese Minister of Trade in return, but while all this was happening, Daredevil was hot on his adversary's trail. After reaching Japan, he infiltrated a ship belonging to Lord Darkwind, but in his search for Bullseye, he came upon Yuriko Oyama, who had been chained to the wall of the vessel's sickbay. After escaping from the ship together, Yuriko helped Daredevil reach Darkwind's island in the hopes of convincing her beloved Kira to turn away from his fanatical devotion to her father. While there, the man without fear fought his way through a number of samurai in Darkwind's private army. He and Yuriko also spent a cold night together to keep each other warm in the midst of a winter storm. The day after those two arrived on the island, Kira prepared to bring Bullseye back to Hokkaido, but the assassin confessed that he had no intention of fulfilling Lord Darkwind's request without an actual monetary payment. Kira then attempted to stop him from leaving, but Bullseye knocked the young warrior out with a wine bottle and escaped from the island alone. Daredevil, meanwhile, continued to search Darkwind's fortress, unaware that it was too late. Nearly overwhelmed by samurai as an earthquake shook the island, interfering with his enhanced senses, the man without fear soon came face to masked face with Kenji Oyama himself. But rather than an epic showdown, this encounter was literally cut short as Yuriko Oyama delivered a swift and decisive killing blow to her own father from behind, bringing the life of the notorious Lord Darkwind to an abrupt end. Soon afterwards, she found and reunited with Kira, while Daredevil departed to return to the United States. However, while Darkwind was dead, the fanaticism he bred in his followers lived on, and the disgraced Kira took his own life soon thereafter. Traumatized and broken-hearted, Yuriko attempted to flee but found herself unable to shake the terrible memory. Unsure of what to do with herself, she studied her father's history, and as she learned more about what drove him, she came to understand his goals. With her older brother Kazuo still presumed dead at the time, ownership of Darkwind's island and command over his samurai forces fell to Yuriko. Donning an armored suit of her own, Yuriko Oyama henceforth dubbed herself Lady Deathstrike. Like her father, she sought to restore Japan's honor by creating an army of adamantium-infused super soldiers. However, it initially seemed like the secrets of the bonding process had died with Darkwind. She sought to find and study Bullseye by tracking the adamantium in his body. However, her search soon led her to one who carried much more of the metal inside himself, one whose entire skeleton was coated using the research that was stolen from her father years prior, Logan the Wolverine. Considering him a thief that had benefited from stolen knowledge, she tracked this new target to Canada with the goal of killing him and taking his skeleton back to Japan for study. However, when she confronted him, Wolverine was aided by his ally, Heather Hudson, aka Vindicator, the leader of the Canadian superhero team Alpha Flight, who single-handedly defeated many of the warriors that Deathstrike brought with her. Furthermore, while the electromagnetically tempered sword that Lady Deathstrike wielded was able to stand up to Logan's claws, the electromagnetic shields in Vindicator's battlesuit proved capable of easily shattering the non-adamantium blade. In the wake of this defeat, it seems that Darkwind's remaining forces lost faith in Yuriko and abandoned her. Seeking allies to help her strike back at Logan, she joined forces with a trio of cyborgs, Reese, Wade Cole, and Angelo Mason. all three of which were mercenaries that formerly worked for the notorious Hellfire Club before they were mutilated by Wolverine and subsequently reconstructed with bionic enhancements by the club's inner circle. To enhance her own strength, Yuriko also struck a deal with an enigmatic woman named Spiral, a bionically enhanced six-armed sorceress who operated a facility in the extra-dimensional Mojoverse called the Body Shop. Now, we talked about Spiral and Mojo World in my video on Longshot, but the important thing for today is that the Body Shop contained advanced alien technology that can be used to completely remake a person's physical form. As such, Spiral also transformed Lady Deathstrike into a cyborg, infusing her body with adamantium in ways that were impossible on Earth. Not only was her skeletal structure laced with adamantium molecules, rendering her bones virtually unbreakable, but her fingers were replaced with foot-long adamantium claws that could retract to resemble ordinary digits and extend up to twice their natural length. This metamorphosis also completely erased her facial scar, symbolically freeing her from the lingering shadow of her father's cruelty. Now, I will note here that official handbooks claim that Lady Deathstrike initially contacted Spiral after striking a deal with Donald Pierce, a former member of the Hellfire Club who led a team of cyborg mercenaries called the Reavers. However, this doesn't really gel with the fact that Pierce was completely unaware of where Yuriko had gotten her cybernetic implants, which were far more advanced and complex than the ones he himself had designed for his Reavers. I'll also note that while some sources indicate that Cole, Mason, and Reese also received body shop upgrades, Spiral nonetheless considered Yuriko's cyborg form to be far superior to theirs, describing her as a living weapon and the ultimate woman of war. All that aside, with a trio of cyborgs who also wanted revenge on Wolverine backing her up, Yuriko and her new allies ambushed their mutual foe in New York. Cole, Mason, and Reese were dispatched fairly quickly. However, Lady Deathstrike's new form also significantly increased her strength and speed, making her more of a match for Logan. Despite this, Wolverine was able to rely on his animalistic instincts and berserker rage to defeat Yuriko. He came to his senses and stopped just short of killing her, and while Yuriko begged him to end her life, he resented her for pushing him to that point and was appalled by the fact that she had voluntarily gone through a process not unlike the one that was forced on him. Left alive, Yuriko recovered and did subsequently join Donald Pierce, becoming a member of the Reavers alongside Reese, Cole, and Mason. At this point, any of her previous ambitions were completely replaced with a burning desire to take vengeance on Wolverine. During this time, Donald Pierce repeatedly made forceful advances towards Yuriko, insisting that he found her fascinating both as a machine and as a woman. She generally tolerated this and seemingly even returned his affection on occasion, while also demonstrating that she was fully capable of stopping him whenever she chose. After the X-Men took over a former Reavers stronghold in the Australian outback, Lady Deathstrike and her new allies waited until Wolverine was alone and overwhelmed him, crucifying him on a large wooden X and leaving him to die in the scorching sun. However, Logan survived and was rescued by the young mutant Jubilee. While the Reavers searched for them, it was Lady Deathstrike who caught them in her sniper's crosshairs, but she ultimately decided that executing a weakened opponent in such a manner was beneath her, and declared that when the two met again it would be as equals. She continued working with the Reavers for a time after that, participating in an attack on Muir Island's mutant research facility that was ultimately repelled. She also kept hunting for Logan and later forced the silent Aboriginal mutant Gateway to send her directly to her target. However, this caused both Deathstrike and Wolverine, as well as the Alpha Flight member Puck, to be caught in a time vortex, sending them all back to 1937 in the midst of the Spanish Civil War. Allying herself with German troops in Guernica, Lady Deathstrike initially plotted to change the timeline by delivering Wolverine's skeleton to her father years before the disfiguring that led him to become Lord Darkwind in the first place. But during their subsequent battle, Yuriko, Logan, and Puck were pulled through yet another time vortex and ultimately returned to the point in time that they'd come from. Although it is interesting to note that Yuriko Oyama is evidently fluent in German in addition to Japanese and English. Not long after that adventure, Yuriko learned of a legendary Canadian creature called the Hunter in Darkness, which had been captured by a casino owner from Atlantic City named Ronald Parvenu. For context, Wolverine had first encountered the creature years prior and earned its trust after freeing it from a bear trap. Meeting with Parvenu, Yuriko entered into a flirtatious partnership with him and used the Hunter in Darkness to lure Wolverine into another confrontation, effectively torturing the captive creature by locking it in a cramped cage suspended above a jeering crowd. However, another of Logan's foes, the savage Sabretooth, also suspected that Wolverine would try to save the Hunter, and both he and Yuriko struck simultaneously. At the same time, the Hunter in Darkness escaped from its cage and joined the fray, aiding Logan against his two foes. Complicating matters even further, a gun-wielding woman named Emmy Doolin attempted to seize the opportunity to kill the creature, who she mistakenly blamed for her father's death. The ironic truth is that Doolin's father, RCMP officer Sergeant Doolin, was fatally shot by an escaped serial killer, Athabasca Ike, and that the Hunter in Darkness slew her father's killer. Not knowing this, when Doolin attempted to fire on the savage opponents fighting in the darkness, she initially hit Lady Deathstrike, who fell from the roof and fled once again. In the end, Wolverine and Jubilee stopped Emmy Doolin, while Deathstrike, Sabretooth, and the Hunter in Darkness all escaped. Yuriko subsequently returned to the Reavers, however the team was then attacked by a squadron of highly advanced Sentinels sent from the future by the time traveler Trevor Fitzroy. His backstory is not terribly important for today, but at the time he was targeting people with connections to the Hellfire Club, including Donald Pierce. And while most of the Reavers were seemingly wiped out in the attack, Lady Deathstrike survived and escaped. In the wake of that, Yuriko reunited with Parvenu, who provided her with information that led her to Wolverine, allowing her to challenge him yet again. This time, however, she was shocked to learn that since their last encounter, the adamantium in his body had been ripped away by Magneto, and his overtaxed healing factor was still recovering because of it. Logan essentially offered to surrender and let Yuriko take her long-awaited revenge, provided she promised not to attack his allies. Initially unsure of what to do in this situation, Yuriko ultimately decided that while she had been robbed of her birthright, sacrificed her humanity, and cheated of her revenge, she would not give up her sense of honor, and departed, declaring that they would settle their feud another time. Parvenu failed to understand why she didn't finish him when she had the chance, and Yuriko left him again, this time for good. Meanwhile, although Donald Pierce was seemingly killed in Trevor Fitzroy's attack, his consciousness remained dormant within his body's cyborg circuits, allowing him to be repaired and revived by a mysterious benefactor. Once again in need of purpose, Yuriko returned to his employ and received further upgrades from him, gaining a cybernetic healing factor. Pierce then sent her to abduct a man named Milo Thurman from government custody, as his hyper-developed brain allowed him to make borderline prophetic predictions. That whole situation led to a confrontation with Milo's former wife, Nina Thurman, better known as the mutant mercenary Domino, during which Lady Deathstrike demonstrated just how thorough her cybernetic transformation had become, and just how potent her new healing factor was. In the end, Domino was unable to save her ex-husband's life, but she did succeed in preventing Pierce from gaining his abilities and destroyed his base. Not long after that, there was an incident in which Zoe Culloden, an expediter for the interdimensional holding firm Landau, Luckman, and Lake, entrusted Wolverine with a mysterious wooden box. Now, as far as I can tell, the glowing contents of this box remain unidentified to this day. However, it evidently once belonged to Kenji Oyama, causing Lady Deathstrike to attack Wolverine once again in an attempt to reclaim it. She ultimately agreed to a truce when Logan proposed they attempt to learn more about the enigmatic organization that Culloden worked for. However, this soon came to an abrupt end when Yuriko was possessed by the vengeful spirit of Wolverine's former sensei, Ogun. Weirdly enough, the wooden box and its unrevealed contents were quickly forgotten after that, despite the likes of Diamond Hellstrom, the literal son of Satan, showing up to warn Logan that it needed to be kept out of the wrong hands. Of course, Wolverine and the X-Men did have to deal with the human Sentinel hybrid Bastion and Operation Zero Tolerance immediately after all that, so I suppose that took priority. Also, the writer on the book changed. Anyway, Lady Deathstrike later resurfaced in Japan, free of Ogun's possession, and briefly clashed there with Captain America. After that, she was targeted by Cable's evil time-traveling clone, Strife, who wanted to make use of her body's programs in the creation of new Sentinels. She was attacked by a squadron of Prime Sentinels, themselves cyborgs created by Bastion, but this particular batch were controlled by Strife. In this instance, she went to the X-Men for help, and in the end, the team successfully defeated Strife and thwarted his plans. By this point, Wolverine had regained his adamantium skeleton thanks to Apocalypse, who stripped the metal from Sabretooth's bones and transferred it to Logan. Sabretooth later sought revenge, recruiting Lady Deathstrike to his side, as well as another of Logan's enemies, the Russian mutant Omega Red. To lure their target into a trap, Deathstrike and Omega Red attacked Logan's friend and sometimes lover Yukio, leaving her crippled, and abducted his foster daughter, an orphaned girl named Amiko Kobayashi. That obviously got Wolverine's attention, but Sabretooth then betrayed his allies, teleporting away with their target, the hostage, and the money that he owed them. After that debacle, Yuriko found work as an international mercenary, but her desire to take vengeance on Logan was fully reignited. For a time, she worked for a mobster named Nico Petty, successfully completing a number of missions for him, but ultimately turned against him when he staunchly refused to aid her in her quest to defeat Wolverine, as he fully believed that it was a hopeless pursuit. In the midst of this, Logan attacked Yuriko, intending on killing her for what she did to Yukio and Amiko. This time, Lady Deathstrike actually gained the upper hand in their fight. However, Logan called her bluff, declaring that if she killed him, she would no longer have a purpose in life, and in the end she found herself unable to end his. This allowed Wolverine to turn the tables and regain the initiative, and once again she demanded that he kill her. However, Logan again refused, declaring that if she wanted to die, someone else would have to do it, because the blood feud between them was over. Of course, that was far from the end of Lady Deathstrike herself, who has continued to be a recurring foe for Wolverine and the X-Men, as well as a deadly presence in the Marvel Universe. Over the years, she has used her status and resources to head companies like the Oyama Design Group and Oyama Heavy Industries, ensuring her own continued wealth. She briefly allied with a figure from her childhood, Reverend William Stryker, freeing him from custody, although she shared neither his faith in God nor his intense desire to eradicate mutant kind. Despite this indifference to his cause, after his death, she helped Stryker's followers, the Purifiers, in their search for the newborn mutant messiah, Hope Summers, and led a new army of Reavers against a team of young X-Men. This time, she was defeated by Laura Kinney, aka X-23, who, well, long story short, is basically Wolverine's daughter that was created using cloning technology and a surrogate mother. Yuriko was badly damaged in that fight, but was subsequently repaired by Spiral, and both women joined a sisterhood assembled by the Red Queen, Madeline Pryor, who we've talked about on the channel before. Almost completely mechanical by this point, she also joined a group of self-aware machines known as the Descendants, before they were defeated by a team of secret Avengers. Even after her body was destroyed, she survived yet again by transferring her consciousness and powers into a cluster of nanites that could infect and inhabit other bodies, like the thrill-seeking Colombian billionaire Ana Cortez. Initially, she and Cortez shared their combined form, but due to a series of complicated circumstances involving Madeline Pryor and the sentient bacteria Archaea, Yuriko ended up completely taking over the body of the Japanese assassin Reiko. Since then, Yuriko herself has continued to operate as an international assassin, and even reunited with her older brother, Kazuo, who adopted a similar codename Lord Deathstrike. She's also had plenty more appearances over the past decade or so that we don't have time to delve into here, so if you want to read more of her adventures for yourself, you can check out some books like Wolverines from 2015, Weapon X from 2017, or Deadpool from 2022. In the meantime, that's all I've got for you this week, and so thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!